Okay, well, here we are. Welcome to Breaking Convention.
Welcome to Breaking Convention. Well, those of you who were here last night, welcome back, and it's nice to see you again bright and early this morning. And for those of you who are just arriving, I'd like to give you a big welcome here to the University of Kent. I'm Anna Waldstein, and I'm a lecturer here in medical anthropology and one of the members of the organizing committee. And I'm not going to say very much now because you will see me, on and off throughout the weekend, I'm sure. But I just wanted to say thank you for turning up.
I'm Cameron Adams. I'm another lecturer here in the Department of Anthropology. And there's a couple of things I want to say. And one is that up until last night, you guys were a bunch of names on a list on a computer. Now you're people, and it is a most wonderful feeling to have done this. It's been so stressful and so anxious. You know, you start a party, you don't know who's going to come, even if they say they're coming. There's all these RSVPs. You guys showed up, and last night was a really wonderful event, and all you guys here today really makes us all feel wonderful that we've actually achieved something worth having done. We didn't expect this conference to be this big. We expected about 50 people. One afternoon, maybe 8 to 10 speakers. This was really our plan. And it grew. And it's obviously because there is something here. This is something that you all desire, that the population desires, and there's plenty of people who didn't come who wanted to. And in my research, which you'll hear about tomorrow if you come to my talk, one of the most important things for the maintenance of health I'm finding and what psychedelics do for health is a clear sense of coherence, of belonging to something, being part of something, and a sense of well-being that comes from that has actually psychological and physiological effects. Many of you might feel like you're the only psychonaut in your community. Now you know you're not. We have community here. There's coherence and stuff. This is a healing event at that level. So hopefully it continues and we all walk out of here brilliantly healthy, healed, and ready for more.
Anna, my name is Ben Sessa. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and part-time psychedelic researcher when not working with mentally ill children who are deaf. That's my day job. Yeah, it's the journey that this conference has taken has been really, really interesting. It was only a year ago, exactly a year ago, that I was sitting by the pool in San Jose with Dave, sipping beer at the MAPS conference, and we looked around us at this amazing conference, and we said to each other, could we ever have a psychedelic conference in the UK? And I was like, oh, we could never do anything like this. And Dave, in his boundless enthusiasm, said, yeah, we can do it, we can do it. And 12 months later, here we are, and we've put this thing together on a shoestring. We're just a bunch of ragtag academics and skanky students, and it's worked. Yeah, and it's worked, and it is like we've thrown a big house party and you've all come, and that's just fantastic. I I think the nature of the way it's been organised means that it's got a really communal feel. It's completely anti-corporate and anti-organisation. We've just asked all our friends, basically, and so everyone's pitched in, and you're all part of it. And do help out throughout the weekend if you think there's things that need to be done or any suggestions. Come and help us achieve it. This is a wave, a second psychedelic revolution going on in the last 5 or 10 years. The second bite of the cherry. This is not the 1960s, and we've come a long way after a 40-year hiatus of psychedelic research. And we really need to think carefully about how we're going to integrate this experience this time round. In a way, we're preaching to the converted here. I've never seen such a bunch of bloody hippies in my life. I thought I was putting on a medical conference. I'm not quite sure what happened. We need to find the language to communicate the transformative experiences that we know to the general public, because the general public are understandably cautious, and we need to find a way to transform and educate and use a language that's going to work. And I think for me as a psychiatrist, what drives me is the belief that these substances are transformative and can have a real impact on people's mental health in a very positive way. But my colleagues are understandably cautious, and this is what I'd like to achieve today with the Psychedelic Psychiatry Forum, is finding a language and finding an open debate in which we can find a way to communicate to everybody, not just the converted. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely weekend. Can you all wave your flowers to me for a second? Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to Breaking Convention. I'm David Luke. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Greenwich, and I also run a lecture series at the October Gallery in central London. It's called the Ecology, Cosmos and Consciousness lecture series. You're welcome to come along to that at any point in time. And for me, this is a bit of an outgrowth of that in many respects, because we put on lots of speakers with a kind of psychedelic shamanic theme in many respects. And also I had a hand in helping organise a conference in Bath. Some of you may remember that back in 2004, which was ostensibly a conference on kind of alternative religions, but it is primarily a psychedelic conference in many respects as well. So it's been a kind of wonderful opportunity to really kind of get involved and help out in the organisation here. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. One thing I will say is that we've had people coming here from over 32 different countries. You can see here on this map all the locations where people have come from. So it really is a totally international affair. Kind of zoom in here. Can you maybe see that a little bit? Do the lights. We have obviously all across Europe, and primarily from the UK as well. So if you're out there's people out there in the audience, probably from your country or your town as well, you can meet up with and kind of share some ideas.
I am Dave, as Dave mentioned. Still a student, a skanky student, but in my third year, so not much longer, I'll be a skanky ex-student. I'm doing medical anthropology under Anna, and I founded the Psychedelic Society in 2009. As Dave mentioned, this is in some ways an off-branch of his work at the October Gallery, but it's also an offshoot of the Psychedelic Society here, Ben's work with the Royal College of Psychiatry and the Anthropology Department. So it's really a bringing together of all sorts of different people and works and organisations. And there's absolutely no one in this room, anyone who will pass through these doors over the next few days, who doesn't deserve a thank you for helping make this event what it is. So, cheers.
What do psychedelics mean? I have to thank Alan Piper for coming up. He's been kind of badgering me for a long time to do a symposium. at the October Gallery, actually, about what does psychedelics mean. And so I said, hey, great, okay, well, I'll do it here instead. So, and it's about looking at psychedelics from a number of different perspectives. What do psychedelics mean to us? And that kind of rather depends on the perspective we're looking at them from. And that could be from the perspective of our prehistoric ancestors, 18th century chemists, or 21st century researchers, shamans, activists, or policy advisors. And these are just some of the dimensions in which we're going to explore those. But we could say, in a sense, that we all have innocence when we experience psychedelics for the first time. And in many ways, everybody discovers psychedelics for the first time. So what perspective do they come to it with, and what do psychedelics mean to them? In another sense, we could look at it from what does psychedelics actually mean? Do they have their own agenda? And what do they actually mean as well? I won't go into this too much. We're going to kind of explore this again at the end with the panel. And I'll start by inviting up my first speaker, Paul Devereux. Paul is one of my favorite speakers at the October Gallery. He's come and given a couple of talks, one of which is this week. And he's going to kind of set the context for this by kind of taking us all the way back to our prehistoric roots with our ancestors, and give us a kind of short kind of cultural prehistory of psychedelia from kind of the last 30,000 years in about 30 minutes. So that's a kind of 1,000 years a minute, which is a very fast psychedelic download by anyone's standards. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Paul Devereux up.
Okay, I hope you can hear me all right. Yes, I actually refined David's timing to give you a proper prehistory of psychedelia. I'd probably have to speak at 20 or 30,000 years per minute, and even in a heightened state of consciousness, that's a bit of a push. So if you don't mind, I'll skip the first 500,000 years. Suffice it to say that long, long ago in the morning of humanity, people woke up and found that they had a human central nervous system, and it was the latest model. It was extremely complex, the most complex thing the world could offer. And they started playing with it. They could talk, they could tell stories, they could laugh, they could weep. They could marvel at the beauty of the world around them. And gradually they got to learn that the human central nervous system had little friends out in the countryside, flowers and toads and all sorts of things, and that they could travel out of their bodies, they could move into the flora and fauna of the world around them, and they could even visit other worlds. And that's been true right from that early morning of humanity. There's never been a time when we didn't want to expand consciousness. Having said that, and coming back to the realities of my now, 28 minutes, I'm going to look at just a few examples of specific ancient sites where there's some evidence, sometimes a lot of evidence, sometimes less, that actual psychedelic substances were used in conjunction with those places. And the chronology I'll do is a bit generalized. There's a bit of overlap here and there. But anyway, some of these places you'll know of, but I think there'll be probably a few you don't know about. Now, all we've got to do is... Okay, we'll start about 9,000 years ago. This is Tassili Niger in the central Sahara, and there are many, many panels of rock art there. And these were done at a time when the Sahara had rivers running through it and there were verdant valleys. We can see how ecological factors can change and vary. Two of the famous pieces of rock art from this area is this one here, apparently a bee shaman. And in my drawing here, I've exaggerated and emphasized the mushrooms. Clearly a mushroom shaman. And on another panel, there's a lot of little figures with mushroom heads running around, the mushroom spirits. And this idea of mushroom spirits, of course, runs very wide, both geographically and in time. We can find Bronze Age carvings in Siberia of little figures with mushroom heads running around. They're very active. And it's a worldwide phenomenon which raises whole questions just in itself. So, about 9,000 years ago, about 6,000 years ago, we can look at Gavrinis in Brittany. It's a Neolithic passage grave, and it's an extraordinary place. As you go in through the entrance, go down a passageway. Can we have a bit less light? I think we've been bleached a little.
It's for the cameras, I'm afraid.
Oh, is it? Okay. This is for the audience. But anyway, so we go down the passageway, and it's a freaky, it's a psychedelic experience, because all over the walls and in the ceiling are these spiralic carvings. The place seems alive and seething with these lines. And finally, you get into a central chamber, and again, you see these very complex and convoluted linear features. Now, what's interesting is that the capstone, part of the capstone over the top of the passageway, has been turned round. And on the upper side are representational rock images like these, sort of bison and whatever. And then suddenly, that type of art stopped. And the next thing we know, we've got these lines everywhere, this linear pattern. At the same time, these things appeared, these braziers, turned up in the same corner of Brittany. And the theory is that these were opium containers, braziers. And we know that opium spread from the eastern Mediterranean region right up, and it seems right up into Stone Age, northwestern Europe. So we probably have a link here between a mind-altering substance and the actual architecture of monuments. Oops. Good. Stonehenge. There's been no direct link as yet with psychoactive substances, but we think we're finding a link. And it relates to the blue stones here, which are the smallest stones of Stonehenge. These big things, the sarsen stones, were put in much later, about 1,000 years after these first appeared at the site. And these are brought from southwest Wales, and many of them originated in Mynydd Preseli, and particularly along this ridge here, where there's a lot of outcrops of rock. We've been doing work with the Royal College of Art over the last couple of years, and been exploring this source area of the blue stones. And this is a Google Eye view of these particular outcrops.
Paul,
Yes?
that picture over there is a lot clearer.
This one?
Either of the two end ones are a lot clearer.
Okay. Mind your eyes. Okay. So we've been doing that work, and what we've been doing is basically knocking on rock, because what we found is that the source of the blue stones is a soundscape. It's an acoustic area. And I'll try and give you an example. This block of rock here, 7-10 tons of basically granite. It sounds like this if you hit it with a small hammerstone. That's to wake you up. But what we've discovered is that there's this high percentage, they're called lithophones, and we've been studying lithophones all over the world. And you'll find them in 7th, 8th century Indian temples. You'll find them in vision quest sites in the Americas. You'll find them in many, many places throughout Africa. And they all have this association with spirits, spirits being in the rocks. And we think Minith Priscilla is a very productive area of magic mushrooms. And given the history throughout the world and throughout prehistory of people using these plants, I think it's not too much of a stretch to say the reason that the bluestones were special, I mean, they were brought 150, 200 miles from Minith Priscilla to Stonehenge, is that they had some magical property, that they had a supernatural potency, that they had spirits in the rock. They were sacred objects. And so we're looking into that. So I think there possibly is a link with Stonehenge. In the 1990s, keeping in the Stone Age of northwestern Europe, Jeremy Dronfield did some interesting work. He studied the rock art in Ireland, prehistoric rock art, and he studied those markings against entoptic patterns drawn by laboratory subjects under cannabis, psilocybin, and so forth. And he was able to extract different classes of imagery from the rock art, and one of the ones that came up strong was psilocybin-linked imagery. So it looks like a lot of the incredible rock art of prehistory might have been associated with that. Another interesting thing from the Stonehenge, in this country particularly, is the occurrence of grooved ware. Now, this particular type of pottery appeared in Neolithic Britain, and it appears in all the henge monuments from very northernmost parts of Scotland right through to southern England. And there was some research on one of these pots, and traces of henbane were found inside it. And some clever person cleaned the pot, so the evidence for that is gone. But that's a lot. So we're perhaps looking at a particular corpus, a particular group of people who were traveling from one ceremonial center to the other with mind-altering substances and rituals, and a lot of work there to be done on that. Jumping now to about 4,500 years ago, we come to Minoan Crete, Bronze Age Crete, and we know the big thing there was poppies, was opium. There's this figurine here, the so-called poppy goddess, has poppies in her headband, and she was found in what basically was an opium den on Crete, on Bronze Age Crete. And it's also needles for the use of opium have been found in Mycenae and so on. As we know, there's no real wild strain of poppies. They were cultivated from the remotest times. And then, perhaps about 3,500 years ago, we come to Eleusis, the mystery temple on mainland Greece. And many of you will know about this, of course. There was a day-long session or ceremony in which candidates who were going to go through the mysteries would set out from Athens, 17 miles, to the site of Eleusis, and they'd undergo various observances. On the way, they'd drink the kykeon, a special ritual drink, and they'd end their day in the telesterion, which was a unique building. We've never seen anything like it before in ancient Greece. And something went on there that people were told that if they said anything about it, they'd be banished from the country. So there's been a lot of debate what the kykeon was. And the best bet, the best evidence is that it was a beer, perhaps made from ergot, a parasite of rye, and if you like, was the natural version of LSD. And I remember on his 90th birthday talking to Albert Hoffman, and he had the vision of an Eleusinian mystery school for the 20th, 21st century, that we need something like this. This place was operative for 2,000 years, and virtually all the great Greek philosophers went through the mysteries here. And it was said that if you go through them, you never fear death again. And if we could have an organized process like that within our mainstream culture today, we would see big changes. Then about what we got here. I've got to hold this? Okay. All right. About 2,500 years ago, we can look at Delphi, also on mainland Greece. And this was the haunt of the Pythia, the prophetess. And there was a whole sequence of these over the centuries, and kings and princes and generals and people would come to her for prophecy, to say how a battle would go, how a particular enterprise might turn out. She sat on a special seat called a tripod, and you see there, she had laurel leaves in a bowl, and it was said that the tripod was situated over a crack, a fissure in the ground, from which emerged pneuma, a special type of gas. And this idea of this emerging gas is very strong in the whole story of Delphi, which I obviously don't have time to go into. And for at least 40 years, academic scholars just dismissed this whole idea. But a few years ago, they found there was, in fact, a fault line running through the temple, and that it had emitted hydrocarbons, methane, ethane, and ethylene. So it turns out, really, that the Pythia was a glue sniffer and explained her manic prophecies. Okay, switching channels a little, move to the Andes. And the Andes were the home of tremendous amount of drug taking in prehistory. If we start more or less at the top end, the northern end, we have Chavin de Huantar, which is famous for its carving showing San Pedro cactus, and a guy with a mask on, presumably, or he might be transforming into a creature. In fact, there's many other psychoactive chemicals used there. Also, there was a lot of acoustic behavior, curious labyrinthine corridors with strange sound effects. Light was controlled. So it was a total multimedia experience, that temple, and it was the source or core of a vast pilgrimage tradition throughout the Andes. If you go down towards the other end, we come to Tiahuanaco, and that's perhaps 2,000 years later, give or take 1,500 years later. And a tremendous amount of psychedelic paraphernalia were found there. They had snuffs and snuff trays for psychoactive snuffs. They had all sorts of stuff. Now, in between are the famous Nazca lines. And There's been a lot of speculation about what they are. What's very important is to know that some of these lines have deep ruts in them where people have walked and walked and walked backwards and forwards. There's many other lines throughout the Americas and throughout the Andes, but can't go into that here. But right up in northern Colombia are the Kogi Indians, and in a way they give a clue to what was going on. The Kogi Indian tribe, which is now in great danger of really being disassembled, is the remains of the Tyronis culture. And the Tirona culture fluoresced when it got onto mushrooms. Suddenly, it really happened. And there is an elite of shamans, the mamas, and outside one of the old Tirona structures is this standing stone. It's got a lot of crisscross lines on it, and they also have a lot of stone roads. And the mamas can see both the physical world and the lunar, sort of spirit world, superimposed or laminated onto the physical topography. And these roads are physical for a distance, but then they stop, but the mamas can see them continuing on in a lunar. So it seems that this whole straight line phenomenon in the Americas, and it's vast, seem to be related to some idea of spirit. The people are told to walk the roads backwards and forwards as a sort of religious exercise. We know the people were taking drugs. We know they had out-of-body experiences. You see the little god of Paracas up there. Flies off. My guest, Marlene Dorian, Dobkin Dorios, also came up with the same idea, that the Nazca lines and these other lines are related. They're a sort of spirit geography related to the shamanic experience of shamanic flight. You understand I'm giving a very quick account here. Same straight line phenomenon occurs in the Mayan causeways, straight road systems running through the forest. So the longest one is about 60 miles long from Cobar to Yashuna. Again, the Mayans associated with magical mushroom psilocybin activity and various other drugs. The later Aztecs had at least 40 different psychoactives that they used at various times. This is Xochipilli, the Aztec god of flowers, and it's got a lot of psychoactive flora all over him. Coming on a bit, about 4,000 years ago, we have the White Shaman Shelter in Seminole Canyon area on the Texas-Mexico border. And there are these 4,000-year-old paintings. And this one is called the White Shaman because of this image here, which apparently shows, if you can see this, a figure in white seemingly rising up out of a dark figure of the same dimensions. And it's thought that's possibly one of the earliest depictions of the out-of-body experience. It's in the heartland of peyote. I've seen some of the shamanic shaman sort of little medicine rolls, and they've been marvelously preserved in the arid conditions. And there's little crystals in there, psychoactive beans, little heads of peyote and so forth. They found peyote caches in this and around the other rock shelters that are perhaps up to 5,000, even 7,000 years old. So the archaeologist, who was an artist, who became an archaeologist, Caroline Boyd, has some fabulous work here. And she's compared it to the Huichol Indian tapestries that are based on peyote visions. Now, over the greater US Southwest, one of the greatest ritual sacramental plants was Datura, the old thorn apple. This is, in fact, one of Caroline Boyd's drawings. showing the various depictions he's found in the rock art of the greater southwest, showing datura seeds. In Coahuila, which is near, well, it's in New Mexico, south of Santa Fe, there's a pre-Columbian depiction of a shaman holding datura. That's a reproduction, that one. The actual one looks like that. Pre-Columbian wall painting, not a lot of them around. Over on the Gila River, which is right along the right along the bottom of Arizona, down here, there's a curious site. It's on top of a mesa, and we can see that there's a line. You can just make it out. What happens here, if you remove that top darkened surface, it's the same as at Nazca actually, a very bright subsoil is revealed. So you can make a mark and it's a bright yellow or white marking against the dark oxidized top surface. This line is so old, it's almost sunk back. It's been oxidized. It's about 1,600 years old. And at one end, it has a vision quest site, a sort of semicircle of rocks. I put a tape down here so you can see the line. And it leads to that rock there, which has a notch in it. And we know from ethnography that the Pima Indian doctor or shaman would go out on midsummer night, and he would take his datura, he'd sit in his vision quest site, and at a certain point he'd leave his body and travel along the line and out to the mountain that you see beyond in the notch. Sacred mountain, and the sun rose over it at midsummer, and it was very powerful then, and he could fly there in spirit, and he could obtain tremendous supernatural power in so doing. Another example, Grapevine Canyon, which is at the foot of Bald Mountain in Nevada, and it was at the end of a pilgrimage trail that came from the Mexican border up along the Colorado River Valley to it. On the route, you'll see there's very large geoglyph patterns, and dancing and ritual activity took part in them, all pre-Columbian this. That's the mountain in question. It's the home of Mastamo, the creator god. And shamans, particularly range shamans, came from over 400 miles away, would gather in the canyon at the foot of the mountain, take their datura, and leave their visions scratched on the walls of the canyon. About 40,000 panels of rock art there. There are exceptions. There are other things going on. In Pony Hills, which is in New Mexico, again near the present-day Mexican border. Pony Hills is just a ridge. It's not the big mountains, but just this ridge. It doesn't look very special, but when you get up to it, you realize it was special because there's wonderful cold crystalline water in an otherwise arid environment. And when you start looking closely at the rocks, you see images carved on them. It was the ritual center of Mimbre Indian shamans, and they took mushrooms. And when you walk around this remarkable place, you see little spirit footprints linking the water holes. And this thing, which I had never seen one of these before, very few people have visited this site, by the way. There's about a meter-long mushroom-shaped object with a shaman and little headgear at the bottom. This is a human foot carved. This is a bear print, supposedly. They were bear shamans. All around you see bear footprints going up vertical rock walls and so on. And it would seem that mushrooms were kind of important there. They also had little prayer sticks, culturally, powers, that were, people say just prayer sticks, but they're shaped like mushrooms. Hopewell Indian earthworks, about 1,200 years ago. These fabulously exact geometric earthwork structures in Ohio and around were left by these people. The Hopewell were a consortium of tribes, and they all subscribed to the same religion, if you like. It was shamanic. This is some shamanic regalia. That's a mushroom stick that was plated with copper that was found in one of the shamans' graves. And finally, we come to Tempe Butte in Greater Phoenix. And I came across this account from Smithsonian Institution Ethnographic Literature. And it was an account given about a century ago by an old Pima Indian doctor who said he obtained his powers and abilities one day when he went up into a cave in the side of Tempe Butte. And we were able to find that cave. And he said when he got in there, there was a spirit in the shape of a man who gave him a strangely colored cigarette. And he smoked this thing, and he passed out. And his spirit left his body, and he went out of the cave, and he could see linking Tempe Butte with the next butte along a fine, like spider's thread running through the air. And he found he could travel along this. And then that led somewhere else and somewhere else. And finally, he ended up at San Francisco Peak. So we have this image of these spectral straight lines linking these sacred places that could only be traveled in an altered state, in shamanic flight. And of course, this is the same image that basically you find on the Nazca Plateau and you find in many, many other places. So I think in the Americas, pre-Columbian Americas, we actually have diagrams scratched on the earth that relate to the psychedelic experience. We don't know the antiquity of this, but you know, if you want a less rushed account, I've got my book on sale upstairs in the bookshop. Okay.